We're talking conservation. This podcast is in collaboration with the Conservation Technology Information Center, the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association, and the Red River Farm Network. I'm Don Wick, and we have the pleasure to be visiting with a good friend, Ed Hegland, a farmer from Appleton, Minnesota. Ed, thanks for joining us, first of all.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. I look forward to it.
Well, let's talk about your farm, first of all. Tell us a little bit about your operation.
I farm in Lacaparo County in southwestern Minnesota and raise corn, soybeans, and wheat when the market allows and when the spring planting season allows. Um, I've been farming since I graduated from the University of Minnesota in 1992 and farmed with my parents. And now my dad had passed away, and my mom was out of the operation. So my wife and I and have a 21-year-old son that has one more year of college and wants to get involved. So it's kind of fun to see the next generation. But yeah, so I've been using a number of conservation methods in my farming operation since I started farming, no-tilling soybeans and using either vertical tillage or just some real light tillage, and gave up on all the heavy tillage a number of years ago and strip tilled and now worked my way to 100% no-till. So quite a change in the operation and kind of an oddity in the area to be doing that.
So how did you even get started? Was your dad doing some of this work, or what was the transition to it?
Yeah, my dad was, I call him a real conservationist. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, planting lots of tree lines, and we never really had to do any terraces, but a lot of, waterways, grass waterways, and chisel plowing when everybody else was still moldboard plowing. And so I saw that growing up, trying to be good for the wildlife and save the soil and still produce the best crops we can, and so I grew up with that. And the easy thing to start to me was I started no-tilling soybeans, and that would have been in, I suppose, the mid 90s. I bought a air seeder and was doing that, and that to me is just a gateway into it. It's pretty simple to do and saves so much horsepower and fuel and labor. So that was the start of it, and then in about 2005, I started testing out. I had a neighbor that had a strip till machine, and so I strip tilled some corn, just 80 acres the first year, and tested it out, and that seemed to work. And hired a co-op to do some more acres the next year, and then finally that third year in about 2008, I bought a strip till machine. And so I strip tilled for from 2008 to 2020. And then I started no-tilling. I was testing side by side no-till and strip till, and testing conventional till and strip till, and just seemed like the no-till yields were hanging in there, and my costs and labor requirements were so much less, and my yields stayed the same. I have a variety of soils. I don't, around north of me, around the Appleton area, there's a lot of lighter, sandier soil where I think it would work tremendously. In fact, I know some people that do some strip till and no till. I have a mix of soils, some heavier, and I don't really have any sand, but I have some little bit lighter soil. But then I do have some real heavy soil, and I do it on all of it, and it works. So it's been a fun transition, and like I said, I'm sure it's the talk of the neighborhood because not many others are doing it. And when I've added cover crops into the mix, that really draws people's attention, wondering what kind of weeds I have growing out there. But I don't mind being the talk, I guess, a little bit, as long as the yields are there.
That's it. We are a bottom line business. What does it mean for productivity? It sounds like yields and everything else is there, so the ROI is what you're looking for.
That's right. The my best source of information on yields in my neighborhood is my crop insurance agent. The farmers don't always tell the exact yields. They might tell you their best spots, but so I've been asking him over the years what how my yields compare to just across the fence row or across the road from my fields, and I've been right in there, or even better. Like in 2021. I was quite a bit better than the neighbors when that was my first year of no-till. In 2023, last year when we had the real drought, um, my crops looked really tough through about this time of year, and I was really frustrated with it. And then when everybody else's ran out of moisture, mine really turned dark green and got into the nitrogen. I think the cereal rye that I had out there, it was breaking down enough that it was giving up some nutrients for the corn, and really ultimately had a pretty good year considering the extreme dryness. This year's to be determined when we've had 30 inches of rain instead of the 4 we had last year at this time. So we'll see, but things will look a little slow, but all of it does, not just mine. And so we'll see what it does in an extremely wet year.
You mentioned cover crops. Talk to me about that transition and what's your approach to it.
I first tried cover crops in 2014. I had about 280 acres of the farm was prevent planted. I just couldn't get in. If you recall, 10 years ago we had a wet year similar to this. Couldn't get into about 280 acres, and my local NRCS person said, "Well, why don't you try some cover crops? And here's some sources and some ideas." And I did that. So I planted some annual rye, some oats, and some radishes, and then that fall I strip tilled, and it was tremendous growth. Planted them about this time of year, so by October 1st, it was really good, big, huge radishes out there, and I strip tilled into it that fall, and then I planted into it the next spring, and it was some of my toughest ground, and it was my best yield. And so, I mean, it was prevent plant for a reason because it just, didn't have tile at that time, and so it really showed me that, boy, there's something to this. I'd been involved in the CSP program at that time, but it didn't include cover crops. I re-enrolled in CSP the next year. I think in 2016 was my second contract, and then I included a small grain followed by cover crops in that 5-year contract. And so that gave me the chance to plant some wheat and get that wheat off in end of July, beginning of August, and then really try some longer season cover crops. And that's where I started comparing strip till and no till, and really saw the benefits. So I think for people, if you dive right into no till, you may experience some issues that if you use a cover crop, I think the cover crop can alleviate a lot of those issues, just by the soil tilth and the planting, the seed bed, the planting conditions are just really ideal. Even in wet springs like this and dry springs like last year, I just feel that cover crop really makes that transition much easier.
Unlike when you started, it seems like it's cool to be involved in cover crops and some of these conservation things. I look at terms like regenerative agriculture and climate smart agriculture. You weren't dealing with that terminology back in the day, but it really is what you're still doing from your very beginning, Ed.
That's right, and it's I don't first really started noticing it. I mean, I was involved in the Minnesota Soybean Growers and American Soybean Association, and they always gave out a conservation, um, you know, person of the year or whatever for years. And so you'd see no-tillers from Iowa or Ohio or something, but there weren't that many around here. There were a few, but there's, ridge tillers and strip tillers. Um, but yeah, to hear those terms regenerative and stuff, I really started noticing it when the farm magazine started having it in, I don't know, between 5, 6, 7 years ago, you started seeing cover stories in the farm magazine about soil health. And so that was kind of I mean, it's an old ancient concept, but it's really been a new buzzword that has been fun to see, really, that momentum pick up. So it's been fun to be part of.
The Conservation Technology Information Center has a program, Farmers for Soil Health. You're a part of this effort, Ed?
I am. I was on got an email about a webinar that was happening on soil health and kind of regenerative agriculture and no-till, and I believe that was in February. And so I was home and figured I'll click in and see, and was some great presentations from a couple of farmers and from some staff. And then they talked about this Farmers for Soil Health, which I guess I'd heard about, but I didn't think I would qualify for because whether I've already done some of this or done some of that. So I called Dan Kaufman uh, who's a staff, field rep. I forget his title, but for that. And sure enough, he said I would qualify because I wasn't planting at the required rates, population rates for some cover crops, and so I was able to qualify for that. And it's been a great program. It was easy to sign up for. It's just to promote this and to be part of this. There's um, some paperwork that needs to be done, but it was really quite simple, and he walked me through it. So yeah, it's a payment of, I believe the first year is $25 per acre, the second year is 15, and the third year is $10 per acre for for doing cover crops. There's 1,000 acre maximum. Um, and so it just really fit into what I was already doing. And I just love programs that are incentive based and voluntary. I'm afraid if we don't start utilizing some of these things, that there may be more mandatory things to happen. And I don't want that to happen. I think we should take advantage of these programs that will incentivize us to do the right things and the things that yield. I mean, that's the bottom line, is we're in this to make money, to produce a crop. And I wouldn't be doing this just for the feel good part of, I like that part, but I'm a businessman and I want to have this business succeed, especially now that I have a son that wants to be part of the operation, and maybe more than one of my kids, but one for sure has expressed interest. And so I look at that long-term vision, and I wouldn't be doing this if it was hurting my yields and my bottom line. But with the reduced inputs and the much reduced equipment that I have, I don't need that much equipment. I keep, planter, combine, tractor, and a drill to seed my cover crops, and beyond that, pretty streamlined operation.
Any recommendations you'd have for others that maybe aren't at the level you are, that maybe are just getting started, maybe with cover crops, or thinking about jumping into some of these conservation practices?
Yeah, I would think, like I said, the easy thing to do is to no-till your beans. They may not look as pretty for the first month or two because you see some corn stalks out there and that, so they just don't look, perfectly like a black field will. But when it comes, time to harvest, it's going to be right there with the yield. I would try no-tilling some beans. I also Cereal rye has been a real easy. I've had years where I've drilled it. I've had years where I have broadcasted on top and used the vertical tillage to work it in. And one year, harvest was so late, and the ground was already freezing, so I just rented a fertilizer spreader and broadcasted on top, thinking I didn't know what I'd get the next spring. I remember being out there in March looking at the fields, thinking I wasted all my money. By the time I planted my beans, it was a nice growth of cereal rye. So it's kind of a magic bullet almost, as far as getting it to grow. I mean, getting it out there can be drilled. It can be just spread out there. And then I've been letting that grow after my beans are up, and spraying it, in probably mid-June, to knock the cereal rye out, and then the beans grow through that. And that cereal rye really, really prevents a lot of weed growth. It's really amazing how it stops that early weed growth with that thick enough cereal rye. It doesn't have to be super thick, but it's just enough shade out there so it doesn't, it holds back the weeds. So it saves me. There's been a couple of years it saved me a passive herbicide, which that adds up too.
Sounds like some experimentation that happens here. Are there other resources you go to when you're looking for, maybe you're considering something along these lines?
I did go to the National No-Till Conference in 2020, right before COVID. And I gained a lot from that, and I hope to go back. I just didn't fit in my schedule the last few years. Um, I've had a few neighbors and some resources I've used, and now my NRCS office has been helpful with some things. Otherwise, I read a lot. I get a no-till farmer newsletter that comes out every month that has a lot of thoughts and ideas in it, and so I just kind of do my own research. It'd be nice, I've been to some meetings where there's been discussions about it, and that's helpful to talk to others and learn from others' mistakes and others' successes.
Well, hopefully, folks can learn from our conversation today. I sure appreciate you joining and sharing your thoughts here a little bit, Ed.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to do it.
Ed Hegland again from Appleton. We're talking conservation. This podcast made possible by the Conservation Technology Information Center, the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association, and here at the Red River Farm Network. I'm Don Wick.